Close your eyes and smell the salty air, mixed with the stench of vomit and wet wood. You are trapped inside the dark, suffocating belly of a wooden cargo ship. Outside, a massive Mediterranean storm tosses the ship around like a plastic toy. Sailors from 5 different countries are screaming to dead gods, frantically throwing their expensive cargo into the crashing waves to stay afloat. But if you look into the darkest corner of the hold, you will see one man curled up. He is dead to the world, fast asleep through his own execution. For centuries, people have turned the book of Jonah into a simple children's bedtime story. We usually focus on a naughty prophet and a giant whale. We argue about the biology of the fish, trying to figure out how a human could actually survive for 3 days inside a sea monster. But when we do that, we miss the point entirely. The fish is just a tiny footnote in the grand scheme of things. The real story isn't some happy maritime miracle. Instead, it is a terrifying psychological thriller. It is a radical, aggressive attack on religious nationalism, where people think their country is the only one God cares about. Jonah wasn't running away because he was scared, he was running away because he was angry. This ancient text isn't a sweet fable for toddlers. It is a dark, gripping mirror that forces us to look at our own worst prejudices. The story truly begins with a voice cutting through the darkness. God speaks to Jonah and gives him a direct command, "Get up and go to Nineveh." To our modern ears, this sounds like a pretty standard missionary trip, like a pastor visiting a new city to preach. But to an ancient Israelite, this command sounded like a suicide mission. Even worse, it felt like an act of total treason against his own people. Nineveh wasn't just some random city filled with people who worshipped different gods. It was the brutal capital of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. This empire was a terrifying war machine known for its incredible cruelty. They were famous for torturing their enemies, wiping out entire populations, and tearing down nations without a second thought. For an Israelite prophet, the Assyrians were the ultimate bad guys. They were the biggest threat to Jonah's home and everyone he loved. When God tells Jonah to go there, Jonah doesn't hesitate. He immediately packs his bags and runs, but he travels in the exact opposite direction. Nineveh was to the east, across the dry desert. Instead, Jonah goes west. He heads down to the port city of Joppa, buys a ticket, and gets on a ship heading toward Tarshish. Tarshish was on the edge of the known world, basically Spain. If you look at a map, he was trying to put the entire Mediterranean Sea between himself and the voice of God. It is easy to assume Jonah ran away because he was terrified of getting hurt by the brutal Assyrians. Anyone would be scared to walk into the heart of an enemy empire. But the text hints at a much darker, psychological reason for his escape. Jonah doesn't run out of fear for his life, he runs out of hatred. He wants Nineveh to burn. He believes the Assyrians deserve to be destroyed for the horrible things they have done. Jonah's real fear isn't that the people of Nineveh will kill him. His real fear is that God might actually show them mercy. Jonah knows God's character too well. He knows that if he goes to Nineveh and warns them, the people might regret their actions. And if they change their ways, God might forgive them instead of wiping them off the map. To Jonah, the idea of God loving his worst enemies is completely offensive. He would rather abandon his calling, leave his homeland, and risk drowning in a stormy sea than help save the people he hates. To truly understand why Jonah hated Nineveh so much, we have to look closely at the rough reality of life back then. In the 8th century BC, the Middle East was a very dangerous place. The Assyrians were not just ordinary enemies. Archaeologists have dug up ancient stone carvings and writings that prove just how terrifying they really were. The Assyrian army routinely skinned their captured enemies alive. They built massive piles of human skulls right outside city gates to scare anyone who dared to fight back. They even stuck their victims onto sharp wooden poles to die slowly in the sun. When we understand this history, we realize that Jonah was not a coward running away from a difficult job. He was a deeply traumatized citizen. His small country of Israel lived every single day under the dark shadow of this violent superpower. Jonah had likely seen or heard about the horrific things the Assyrian war machine did to neighboring towns. He represents any person throughout history who has ever suffered under a cruel bully and wanted justice. Or, if we are being completely honest, he represents anyone who wanted pure revenge against their abuser. To Jonah, the people of Nineveh were monsters who did not deserve a second chance. They only deserved to be wiped out for the pain they caused. By running away, Jonah was taking a stand. He was refusing to help the empire that wanted to destroy his world. Once Jonah boards the ship to Tarshish, he thinks he has successfully escaped. But when the massive storm hits the sea, the story takes a brilliant, unexpected turn. This twist completely flips the script on how we view good guys and bad guys. Jonah, as a Hebrew prophet, is supposed to be the deeply spiritual hero who cares about God and people. The pagan sailors on the ship are outsiders whom Jonah would normally look down on as godless and wicked. Yet, in the middle of this life-or-death crisis, these sailors show far more goodness, compassion, and respect for God than the prophet himself. As the waves crash over the deck, the terrified ship captain finds Jonah fast asleep in the darkest part of the hold. It is a shocking sight. The captain wakes him up and begs him to pray to his own God to save them all. When the sailors cast lots to figure out who brought this curse upon the ship, the finger points directly at Jonah. Forced to confess, Jonah admits that he worships the God who created the sea and the dry land, and that he is running away from a divine mission. Here is where the contrast becomes sharp and painful. The moment these foreign sailors realize who Jonah's God is, they are filled with a deep, reverent fear. They do not want to offend the Creator of the world. Even though Jonah tells them that the only way to calm the ocean is to toss him overboard, the sailors refuse to do it at first. They actually roll up their sleeves and row with all their might against the crashing waves, trying desperately to save Jonah's life. They value the life of a stranger who brought disaster upon them, while Jonah does not care about the lives of thousands of people in Nineveh. When the sailors finally realize they cannot beat the storm, they pray to Jonah's God, asking for forgiveness before throwing him into the raging water. Jonah practically forces them to do it. He chooses to drop into the cold, dark sea because he prefers drowning over obeying God. He would rather die right there in the ocean than travel east to offer mercy to his enemies. In this intense moment, the pagan sailors shine as symbols of moral clarity, while God's own prophet is trapped in total indifference and bitter apathy. The moment Jonah's body hits the water, the roaring storm stops instantly. The churning waves turn as smooth as glass. As Jonah sinks down into the cold, quiet depths of the Mediterranean Sea, the most famous part of the story arrives. A massive creature glides out of the dark and swallows him whole. While modern storybooks always show a cartoon whale, the original Hebrew text actually uses the words Dag Gadol, which simply means a great fish. To truly understand what is happening here, we have to look at how people in ancient times viewed the ocean. To the people of the ancient Near East, the deep sea was a terrifying place. It was not just water, it was a symbol of absolute chaos, darkness, and death. They believed that massive sea monsters ruled these deep voids, representing forces that wanted to tear the world apart. Sinking into the ocean meant you were being completely erased from existence. This is where the story gives us a brilliant, life-changing piece of wisdom. For generations, people have assumed that God sent the giant fish as a harsh punishment for Jonah's disobedience. We tend to view the belly of the beast as a dark, slimy prison cell. But the actual data in the text tells a completely different story. God did not send the fish to punish Jonah. He sent it to save him. Think of the giant fish not as a prison, but as an emergency shelter. If God had left Jonah alone in the open water, the prophet would have drowned within minutes. The ocean would have claimed his life. Instead, the belly of this creature becomes a strange womb of grace. It is a protective shield holding Jonah back from the deep abyss of his own stubborn rebellion. Even when Jonah chooses death over doing the right thing, God refuses to let him go. The fish is proof that when we run away and hit rock bottom, we often land right into a safety net of mercy. It forces Jonah into a mandatory timeout, trapped in a safe space where he is finally forced to face his own reflection. After 3 days in the dark, the giant fish vomits Jonah out onto the dry sand. Grudgingly, Jonah finally marches toward Nineveh. The text tells us that Nineveh was a massive city, so large that it took 3 whole days just to walk across it. You would think a prophet sent on a major mission would put on a huge, passionate campaign to change the people's hearts. Instead, Jonah delivers the shortest, most half-hearted sermon in history. In the original Hebrew language, his message is only 5 words long: 40 days and Nineveh will be overturned. It is a terrible sermon. Jonah does not offer any advice on how to fix their lives. He does not mention God's love, and he does not even tell them how to repent. He just drops a 5-word threat of total destruction and walks away. This reveals Jonah's true strategy. He is doing the bare minimum required to check the box for God, but deep down, he is still rooting for their failure. He wants his warning to fail so he can watch the city burn. But then, a shocking shift occurs that completely shatters Jonah's plans. Even though the sermon was incredibly lazy, it triggers the greatest spiritual turnaround in history. Like a giant wave, the message ripples instantly through the crowded city streets. It spreads from the poorest neighborhoods all the way up to the royal palace. In an amazing twist, the king of Nineveh steps down from his throne, takes off his royal robes, and puts on rough sackcloth. He even sits in a pile of ashes to show his deep sorrow. The king orders a total fast for the entire empire. In fact, the transformation is so extreme that they even put sackcloth on their cows and sheep. The whole city stops its violence and begs for mercy. When God looks at the data and sees that these brutal people have genuinely changed their behavior, he decides to change his mind. He shows them mercy and spares the city. The ultimate enemy is saved, proving that no one is ever too far gone to receive grace. This is the exact moment where the story takes a deeply uncomfortable turn. In a normal children's book, this is where the story would end. The bad guys say sorry, the prophet wins, and everyone lives happily ever after. But the book of Jonah doesn't give us a neat, happy ending. Instead of celebrating the fact that a massive city of over 100,000 people was saved from destruction, Jonah is absolutely furious. He leaves the city walls, stomps up a nearby hill to the east, sits down in the dirt, and throws a massive temper tantrum because God was simply too nice. As he sits under the blazing hot sun, Jonah finally yells out the real reason he ran away in the first place. He looks up at the sky and says, "I knew that you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity." This is a shocking moment. Jonah's theology is absolutely perfect. He knows the data about God's character inside and out. He can quote the Holy Scriptures perfectly. But his heart is completely broken by the fact that God's love is not exclusive to his own group. Jonah wanted a small, tribal God. He wanted a God who lived in a box, a God who only blessed his favorite nation of Israel and destroyed everyone else. He wanted a weapon to use against his enemies. Instead, Jonah got a cosmic creator whose mercy stretches across borders to love the very people who caused his homeland so much pain. Jonah is miserable because God refused to hate the people that Jonah hated. He sits alone on that dusty hill, trapped in his own bitter anger, unable to accept a grace that is big enough to save the rest of the world. As Jonah sits on the dusty hill stewing in his anger, God decides to give him one final, unforgettable lesson. While the prophet watches the city under the blazing sun, God makes a leafy green vine grow quickly over his head. The broad leaves block out the intense heat, providing a nice patch of cool shade. For the first time in the entire story, Jonah is actually happy. He loves the plant because it makes his life comfortable. But early the next morning, the lesson takes a harsh turn. God sends a tiny worm to chew on the stem of the plant. Within hours, the leafy vine completely withers and dies. To make matters worse, God commands a scorching east wind to blow across the desert. The heat beats down directly on Jonah's bare head until he grows dizzy and faints from exhaustion. Trapped in a state of heat stroke, a miserable Jonah begs to die, crying out that he is better off dead than alive. That is when God confronts him with a brutal, life-changing question. God asks him if it is right for him to be so angry about a simple plant. When Jonah snaps back that he has every right to be angry, God lays out the ultimate truth. He tells Jonah that he felt sorry for a small vine that he didn't even plant or grow, a plant that appeared overnight and died the next day. Then God asks the ultimate question, should I not pity Nineveh, this great city with more than 120,000 people who don't know their right hand from their left, and also many animals? Then, the most shocking twist of all happens. The book ends right there. There is no extra chapter. There is no final verse that says, "And Jonah learned his lesson, said sorry, and lived happily ever after." The story simply stops, leaving that massive question hanging in the air like a heavy mist. It is an intentional cliffhanger designed to act like a mirror for whoever reads it. The author does not let us off the hook by telling us how Jonah responded. Instead, the question is passed directly to us. It forces us to look into our own hearts and ask ourselves if we are willing to let God love the people we would rather hate. When you look at all the facts, it becomes clear that the book of Jonah was never actually about a giant fish. The fish was just a minor detail to move the plot along. Instead, this ancient text is a beautifully designed mirror. It forces us to take a hard look at our own lives and pull out 3 uncomfortable laws about human nature. First, we must face the law of tribal grace. This is the data that proves we always want radical, unlimited forgiveness for our own mistakes, but we demand strict, unyielding punishment for our enemies. Second, there is the law of misplaced comfort. This happens when we weep over our own minor losses and comforts, like Jonah crying over his dead plant, while remaining completely indifferent to millions of hurting people in the city around us. Finally, we must accept the cosmic reality. The data shows that God's mercy is offensively broad. It stretches far beyond the borders of our favorite political parties, our cultural groups, or our religious comfort zones. The story leaves us with a final, lingering question that we cannot avoid. Who is the Nineveh in your life right now? Who is the person, the group, or the enemy that you are secretly wishing destruction upon? If you want to dive deeper into the gritty, unfiltered reality of these ancient texts without the usual Sunday school filters, make sure to hit subscribe. Let's look at the next historical story together right here.